Добро вечер со најновото издание на КОД. Во оваа емисија ќе гледате интервју со Ким Линсквин, кој 3 децении бил федерален обвинител во Соединетите американски држави. Во Македонија неколку седмици работи како обучувач на истражителите од МВР. Иако бивш обвинител, тој смета дека обвинителите не се специјализирани за истраги и тоа треба да го препуштат на професионално обучени лица. Целта според него е наоѓање факти за да се дојде до правдата за жртвата. Ја нагласува виктимизацијата на жртвата која настанува кога системот му ја дава на обвинителот примарната одговорност за истрагата. За него обвинителите се адвокати кои се образовани, но не се едуцирани за да ја спроведат истрагата. Го прашавме и што мисли за истрагата за пожарот во Кочани, кој однесе 62 животи. Обвинети се 34 луѓе и 3 фирми. Но дали роднините на жртвите ќе дојдат до правдата за нивните деца? Поранешниот американски обвинител е изненаден затоа што не се покренати обвиненија за убиство, туку за други кривични дела. Виктимизација на жртвите според него се случува и кога прво се апси, а потоа се врши истрагата. Тоа го наведува истражителот да се насочи кон уапсениот, но допрва треба да изнесе факти за неговата вина. Во следните 20 на минути погледнете го интервјуто. Колку долго бевте обвинител и што по таа обвинителска кариера?
I was a prosecutor for almost 3 decades, and I worked a wide variety of cases, street crime type cases, homicide, extortion, domestic terrorism, international terrorism, organized crime, drug trafficking, money laundering, complex crimes that correspond to the federal system in the United States.
Што е најбитно за еден истражител? Кои елементи треба да ги има за да направи случај?
I'm often asked that question. What attribute makes a good prosecutor? And I surprise people with the answer because, in my opinion, the most important quality is humility. If the prosecutor, with the power that a prosecutor has in charging and bringing someone to justice, does it firmly yet humbly, recognizing that we all make mistakes and that we all have to be accountable for those mistakes that we make, and that it should be approached with compassion. I've always believed that justice should be administered with firmness but with compassion.
Со оглед на тоа што сте биле во повеќе земји и можете да споредите, сте биле во Јужна Америка, сега сте на Балканот, која е разликата или сличноста помеѓу американскиот и овие системи?
Probably the factor that most distinguishes the two basic systems that exist, the English common law system that was spread throughout the world as a result of English colonization, and the continental system that was also spread throughout the world as a result of French, Portuguese, and Spanish colonization, has to do with the presumption of innocence. The common law system presumes innocence, and that has tremendous ramifications as far as the rest of the system is concerned. The continental system historically presumed guilt, and that also affected every different aspect of the system, particularly the investigation. And although during the past, approximately 75 years, most of those countries of the continental legacy have tried to move more toward the common law system because of the many principles, benefits that it offers, it has retained in large measure the idea, the orientation of the presumption of guilt, and that affects dramatically the fairness of the system. And what I've focused on, especially most recently, is how a system can re-victimize the victim as a result of not adopting and applying principles that avoid that re-victimization. And that's probably the biggest distinction. Those countries that have that go forward with the common law tradition are better at helping the victim, at helping vindicate the victim, helping the victim find justice. Those countries that hail from the continental system and the presumption of guilt orientation still struggle with that re-victimization. And in saying that, I want to preface all of my remarks with the caveat that my observations, my criticisms go to the systems and not to the functionaries, because those functionaries are the product of the systems. They're really obligated to apply the systems as they exist. And if those systems re-victimize, those functionaries unwittingly participate in that re-victimization. So my concern, my criticism is really directed toward the systems.
Имаме случаи кочани во кои што загина многу луѓе, има и многу кои што се обвинети. Што мислите за овој случај?
I'm aware of that case from what I have read from the public information. I'm not privy to any information that comes from within the system. It's just what I've read. And what I can say with regard to the system here in North Macedonia is that it is very typical of the mixed system, the former inquisitorial continental system that has tried to adopt some common law features, yet has retained the presumption of guilt orientation, and that again impacts the entire process and retains, still manifests that re-victimization. Perhaps I could just give you a few examples of generally how that re-victimization, how it manifests itself. Re-victimization, for example, happens when the system formalizes the investigation as part of the overall process. And by formalizing the process, I mean that the investigation is controlled by the code. The code dictates just exactly what the functionary has to do, when and how. And in formalizing the investigation, that obligates the investigator to want to comply more with the formalities than with going out and solving the crime. The functionary is very concerned about being obedient to what the code requires as far as the activities in the investigation, primarily, and perhaps secondarily, going out and investigating and finding the relevant facts and proving the crime. And as a result, the investigations tend to be weaker, and weak investigations are the equivalent of a re-victimization of the victim, because their purpose is to find those facts that will bring about justice for the victim. Victimization also occurs when the system gives the prosecutor the primary responsibility of the investigation. Prosecutors, and I can say this because I was a prosecutor, we're not investigators, we're lawyers. We're educated as lawyers, we're trained as lawyers. And to give a lawyer the responsibility of investigating is a bit unfair, because the prosecutor lawyer is not educated, is not trained in that. And that results in a weaker investigation. Worse yet, when the primary responsibility of the investigation falls on the prosecutor, it relegates the police investigator to an inferior role. Basically, an assistant to the prosecutor, obligated to follow the directions of the prosecutor in every detail. That relegated position means that the police investigator does not have the opportunity to develop his or her investigative talents to the degree that they should. It also means that they're not able to get that investigative training that they would otherwise need if they were responsible for the investigation. So you have, in effect, kind of the worst of both worlds. The the lawyer, prosecutor, who's not really an investigator, directing, controlling the investigation, with the individual that is ideally responsible for the investigation not having the opportunity to develop those skills. That results in a weak investigation, and that's revictimization. Revictimization also occurs when the system fails to give the investigator the mechanism that is necessary to identify the relevant facts in proving the crime. And absent that mechanism, the investigator just goes out and collects information regarding the crime in hopes that in that information there will be relevant evidence in order to prove the crime. And one last example of how revictimization occurs is when a system arrests first and then investigates afterwards.
Дали мислите дека ќе беше полесно доколку се поедноставеше случајот или имаше други обвиненија поврзано со овој пожар?
Again, when you arrest first and investigate later, that prompts the investigator to look to the arrested suspect to either confess or prove innocence as a substitute to a strong, solid investigation. And as a result of that, that only confirms, it only reinforces the investigator's lack of training, lack of orientation as far as developing skills, as far as the investigation is concerned. Not to mention that it's unfair to the person that has been arrested before the investigation has taken place. Otherwise, to address your question, again, I've read about that case. I'm not privy to any inside information about the case, but I will tell you that as a prosecutor, I was very surprised to see, and I think this is the case from what I have read, that there were 62 deaths that resulted from this. From what I read, obviously within the context of safety failures. And from my perspective, and I've also looked at the North Macedonian Criminal Code, also from the perspective of the code, I'm surprised that homicide charges were not brought, both from the standpoint of homicide appears to have occurred. Homicide is something that can be readily investigated and proven, and that proof provides more immediate relief to if relief is to be had, more immediate relief, more immediate justice to the victim families. Their opportunity to see that the justice system is actually doing something. Whereas my impression now is, 6 or 7 months have elapsed. I understand that many of the families continue to meet and protest, that I'm assuming saying, where is the justice that we seek? And that just, again, reinforces my surprise that homicide has not been charged as a way of providing more immediate justice to these families. I think it's the result. Once again, my criticism doesn't go to the functionaries. My criticism, if it's warranted, goes to the system, is because the features that would prevent revictimization have yet to be adopted by the system. And in my opinion, it's something that those in authority should seriously consider.
Кај нас истражители се луѓето од полиција, кои ги користи обвинителот. Како тој систем да се промени и од вертикален да стане хоризонтален?
I think it's a fundamental systemic mistake to make the prosecutor be primarily responsible for the investigation. I think that the system should make the police investigator primarily responsible for the investigation. Give him and her the education, the training that they need to perform that work, while you emphasize with the prosecutor the need to do the lawyer work, to accuse and to litigate that case to prosecution, to conviction, as part of the system. In that way, you have the investigator, the investigator police and the prosecutor lawyer working together on a horizontal plane, coordinating their efforts, as opposed to the prosecutor being here in charge of the investigating, instructing the investigator down here who really would like to be more of an investigator but can't because that's not his or her role. If those could be evened so that they're working as peers on the same plane, I think it would make a tremendous difference. Again, I can say that because I come from a system where that is the arrangement between the prosecutor, lawyer, and the police investigator. And it works well. For 30 years, I worked as a prosecutor. I never investigated a case. I provided legal advice to the investigators, but I didn't investigate. I relied upon them and their talents, their abilities, to find the relevant facts. I would take those, charge, and then go forward in bringing about a conviction as, injustice to the victims. When you don't have that horizontal relationship and the relationship is vertical, the investigation takes longer and it's not as effective. And in my opinion, that's not fair to the victim. That's, again, a revictimization of the victim. I would only ask the authorities in North Macedonia, as I have asked authorities in many countries throughout the world, consider changing the role of the prosecutor in relation to the police investigators so that a more effective investigation can be achieved where each is functioning in their own field and not outside their field.
Дали имате некој патерн, некој систем по кој што треба да се работи?
Revictimization can occur when the system fails to give the investigator and the prosecutor the mechanism that's necessary to identify relevant facts. And that's really what the investigation, what justice is all about. On the one hand, you have a crime that's been committed. That crime has to be proven. And the crime, as defined officially, provides the criteria, the standards by which relevant evidence can be identified. So when the investigator goes out, rather than just looking for any information that might relate to the crime, the investigator goes out looking at, I have to prove specifically these elements of the crime. What your code refers to, I forget the article, refers to as the primary attributes of the crime. The investigator goes out looking for evidence that proves the specific aspects of the crime and discarding anything else that doesn't relate to the proof of that, which is so important. Rather than just gathering anything that the investigator might find, the investigator goes out, identifies the relevant facts in precision and analysis, provides that information to the prosecutor evaluates that. If the prosecutor disagrees and feels that more investigation needs to be done, then that can happen. But they continue working together using that tool until the relevant facts have been identified and the case can be proven. That mechanism is so important, and that's why we're here. I so admire the inspired forward thinking of the Interior Minister and Alexander Dyanev, with whom we are working directly, because they see that. They see that investigations can be elevated from just collecting information to identifying relevant evidence analytically, specifically, so that the investigations are done more quickly and more effectively. And that's why we're here. We've been invited here to teach that mechanism, and we've been here 6 weeks, and it's been a marvelous experience.
And how is your feeling about Macedonian investigators who are in police? They are like to learn, they are prepared?
When this has been my first real contact with the Macedonian investigators. And I have to say, when I think about them now, I smile, because we have found them to be extremely capable. They haven't received the training and the opportunity to develop their talents as they should, but basically they are extremely capable. They're bright, they're motivated, and they're willing to learn. Their minds are open, and they're willing to learn and adopt this mechanism. There are those that still resist, But you'll always have those that resist, something new. It's always difficult. But no, for the most part, we're dealing with investigators, men and women, that could participate with the best investigators anywhere in the world. And I've told some of them, I've said, I'll be your prosecutor any day. I'll carry your bags any day. They're very capable. The thing that we're hoping now is that we're able to help the prosecutors see the value of that tool, and that might promote them perhaps working more on a horizontal basis with that tool being the common basis of discussion between them.
That means that you need also to train prosecutors how to cooperate with investigators.
I don't want to be so...
Because of that vertical system.
I don't want to be so presumptuous as to say that I want to train North Macedonian prosecutors. I would hope that the opportunity would arise wherein those prosecutors would consider this mechanism, would recognize it as a valuable tool in doing their work as lawyers, as well as the investigators doing their work as police officers. I'm hoping that can happen.
Можете ли да споделите со нас некое искуство, например искуство од Колумбија каде што сте биле, или некој случај во кој што било потешко или полесно? Кои се вашите искуства?
In 1993, the U.S. Department of Justice asked me to go to Colombia to help them implement their new criminal procedure code. And I was told that the new criminal procedure code was patterned after that of the Great Britain and the United States. And I said, oh, great, I'd love to do that. What do I do? And they said, we have no idea, just go down there and do it. So I went down, and I quickly realized that the new criminal procedure code that they had legislated, although it had some features some cosmetic features, like the English common law system, it was really a retention of the old inquisitorial system from the continent. So it really was the same thing that has existed for years. But that was a valuable experience for me, because before that time, I only knew my system, and I had never been able to compare it against any other system. And so it goes directly to what you're saying. I was able to look at both and see the good and the bad in both, and as a result of that, and I've tried to do this over the past 30 years, identify those universal principles that any criminal justice system could adopt to truly achieve justice and avoid revictimization. And it really is a question of that. Some systems have adopted those principles that avoid revictimization, and some systems have not, to one degree or another. So that's kind of my desire now, is to do as much as I can to help systems identify those universal truths, adopt them, so that victims can truly be cared for and not hurt as a result of the involvement of their justice system.
Сега во мода е употребата и на вештачка интелигенција. Дали тоа може да се примени?
I'm struggling with the relationship between humans and artificial intelligence, especially in this field. Right now, my sense is the best way to investigate a crime is to identify what needs to be proven, use that as the standard for identifying the relevant facts, and just have dedicated, bright human beings go out and do it. How AI can help in that process, I'm still trying to figure out. Without AI taking it over completely, because I'm not convinced that that's wise or possible. So honestly, I'm an old dog trying to learn new tricks as far as AI is concerned, and I'm not sure where it sorts out yet.
Ви благодарам за можноста да го имаме ова интервју.
Thank you so much for having me.
Во Кочани е очигледно дека станува збор за пропуст во системот за безбедност, како што вели мојот соговорник. Но за него останува необично што не е спроведена истрага за убиство, кое според него очигледно е дека се случило, но и со вакво дело би се добила побрза правда за семејствата на жртвите и доверба во правосудниот систем. Со оваа поента го завршуваме ова издание на КОД. Доведување до следното. Имајте убава вечер.